When I first got into the lore about 2 decades ago, I remember opening the brand new 4th edition Space Marine Codex and looking at the list of legions that these genetically engineered super soldiers came from. We got the Dark Angels, Ultramarines, and hell, even some guys called the Iron Hands. Never saw those before. But just like everyone else had wondered in the last 30 years of 40k existing, who the heck are those 2 Primarchs and legions that are missing on the list? What are these mysterious missing entries? Why did the Inquisition or some other force in the Imperium scrap them from the records? Like we had 9 entire legions fall to chaos, and even they haven't been cleansed from every piece of history. What did these guys do? Well, what if I told you we actually have some really decent ideas of who and what the Lost and Forgotten Legions were? There are certain snippets of lore and references in old novels that even the more thorough 40k creators have yet to cover. So yeah, it's my turn on the Lost and Forgotten Legions. In this video we are going to cover what happened to their Primarchs, the exact facts we know for sure that are no longer a mystery, cover some of the major misconceptions the community has about a certain name that was given to one of the lost Primarchs, and end off with what is Games Workshop's true intention with these missing Space Marine legions and Primarch sons of the God Emperor himself. Alright, let's get into the lore. To start this video off, I want to begin by laying out all the pieces of information we know for a fact. We will get into each one of these separately, but here is a general list of all facts that you need to know. This also helps us separate what is and is not people making up their own headcanon lore surrounding the Lost and Forgotten Legions and Primarchs. This information does require that you should know at least a little bit about the Space Marine Legions and the Great Crusade, so I will give a super quick TLDR of what you need to know beforehand. The Age of Strife happened. AI and Psykers have ravaged humanity, and for over 5 millennia now, humanity's empire across the stars has been broken apart by massive warp storms. Everybody is fighting for themselves in essentially utter isolation. But the ancient Eldari Empire screws a new god into existence, and the birth scream of Sanesh wipes away all residual warp storms from our galaxy. Suddenly, Imperials can warp travel again. In M30, Neot, a couple years later known as the Emperor of Mankind, starts reconquering Terra together with his custodies, deceased Thunder Warriors, and a new project in his pocket. This project is the 20 Primarchs with their 20 Space Marine Legions, the ultimate weapon of galactic reconquest. These baby Primarchs, who are still in their gestation pods, get whisked away by the Chaos Gods, Urda or Argoltal, depending on which vision you wanna follow, and then are spread across the galaxy for the Emperor to come fetch. The Emperor is still able to make his 20 Space Marine Legions, although smaller than originally required. As they find their Primarchs one by one, the legions grow out into hundreds of thousands of Space Marines that can face down just about any foe. This fetch quest to combine humanity once again and find the Primarchs is called the Great Crusade. During this exact period, 2 Primarchs/legions go missing, which is what this video is about. As we all know, after about 200 years of crusading, Horus commits a heresy, and then we get into the Scouring, 40k and the return of Robute 10,000 years later. But that is irrelevant to today's video. Now, time to establish the facts of what we know for sure about the 2 lost and forgotten sons of the Emperor. First and very important fact is when the 2 Primarchs were originally found by the Emperor. The Primarch of the 2nd Legion was found at 821 M30, putting him around 23 years into the Great Crusade, and as the 3rd Primarch found behind Horus Lupercal and Leman Russ. Or 4th, if you believe what Alvarius tells us in the novels. On the other hand, the 11th Primarch was found at 927 M30, putting him 129 years into the Crusade, so on the latter half of the Crusade itself, about 70 years before the triumph at Ullanor when Horus is crowned War Master. Which, funnily enough, also connects right to where the Imperium meets the Cryptos, a terrifying new Xeno species, and sends the Alpha Legion to deal with them. Possibly there might be a connection there, but I'm getting off topic already. Both these dates come from the timeline of the 31st millennium, found on the Warhammer website, that weird Horus Heresy timeline thing. I'll link it in the description below. Then, from the chambers at the end of Memory's short story, we have a bunch of very important pieces of information, which is where a lot of people go wrong with the lore. Every single Primarch had a chamber made for them at the Imperial Palace. The door to the second palace quarters was a brass portico, whilst the 11th was identical, but made from steel. A portico is one of those little Roman looking roofs for your front door. It's kinda cute. The survivors of the legions, very important, were somehow repurposed by Malkador, and anyone who remembered these legions in Primarchs had their memory personally adjusted by Malkador himself. We will take a deeper look into this source later in the video, but for your general understanding, as someone trying to figure out what is happening, legionaries and Primarchs generally still remembered the two legions. It was just incredibly hazy with a lack of specific details, which is usually impossible for Astartes and their Primarchs. Now for some factual timeline things and where these legions/Primarchs engaged with the Great Crusade. In the book Clone Lord, it is said that one of the lost Primarchs was sent to the Yimga monolith earlier on in the Great Crusade. This is a massive Necron complex, but it is unclear what was found here or what the purpose of the mission was. In the Forge World Horus Heresy book Inferno, it is implied one of the two lost legions fought in the Rangdan Xenocides. But as this war takes place around the 890s of M30, it means that this was done before the 11th Primarch was found. So most likely it was the second Primarch here that was involved. Now we get into the messy sources where things start to contradict each other. The first heretic implies that both legions were obliterated before 960 M30, but then the last council is pretty adamant that one of them is still active after 981 M30. It could be possible that Lorgar believes they are gone, while one of them was still going around doing things, but that is a little unclear. The Primarchs fell separately and had nothing to do with each other's fall. This is heavily implied in the Lightning Tower short story. Sadly, no further context is given. The next step is to look at all of the accounts of other Primarchs that talk about their lost and forgotten brothers. In Fulgrim the Palatine Phoenix, the Primarch of the Third describes the Primarch of the Second Legion as contemplative, quiet, and missing a sense of humor. Apparently, he also roasted Fulgrim with having hubris. But this could also be a personal interpretation of Fulgrim himself, as personal accounts in Warhammer 40k can be shaky at times to use as lore sources. This would be the same way how Mortarion might roast Magnus, while Lorgar would talk very highly of him. Now in 40k, there is one actual source that directly, and yeah, I'm not kidding, mentions their memory still being around in the 41st millennium. In The Carrion Throne, a novel about two inquisitors dealing with the Dark Eldar, while snooping around under the Imperial Palace, reference a vast tapestry, a master art piece that shows all 20 Primarchs and the Emperor. This piece was never taken down, and it is the only remaining representation of both those Primarchs in probably the entire setting. But for completionist's sake, let's mention Laurie Golding's involvement with the Lost Primarchs as well, who, if you didn't know, worked for Black Library as an editor for their books for at least 6 years. Laurie implies that both Lost Primarchs met Alpharius and Horus at least a few decades before Ulanor. We don't know what went down or why they met up in the first place, but there you go. Talking about Laurie Golding, it is time to debunk a rumor that recently has been resurfacing in the 40k lore community, after a bunch of people started bringing up a very specific name. That name is Malibron. And there is a good reason for it, but let me tell you where that name originated from. Back in the late 2000s, there was a beautiful forum called The Great Crusade. I remember it also heavily being connected to the Bolter and Chainsword forums, but I guess that may have just been the people themselves. Me, alongside a bunch of other people, were busy producing essentially a really early version of the Horus Heresy rule set we have today. I wasn't directly connected, but I made a lot of the Unification Wars rules that came out around that same time. Of course, that bad boy was completely homebrewed and in retrospect, kinda just wrong, but it was a fun one. Also yeah, I was one of those people who bought 8 tactical boxes for the Mark IV and Mark V legs and shoulder pads. Those were dark times for Heresy players. Also, shout out to Templars Crusade 01 from back then. Your channel was an inspiration for everyone with your Heresy campaign. One of the forum Great Crusade events was organized by Laurie Golding, who, as mentioned earlier, went on to work as an editor at Black Library. I think at that time Laurie was trying to get his foot in the door and knew a few of the Black Library authors as a result. One of these was Graham McNeil, who very kindly authored a quick bit of background, the Assault on Gadron Prime, to serve as the background fluff to the campaign. It was super cool and opened up with, which yes, I had to find this bit from Reddit. It might be completely wrong, but let's just run with it. It's the 77th year of the Great Crusade. The Emperor of Mankind leads his 20 legions ever outwards through the galaxy, and Korax, progenitor of the Raven Guard and master of the expedition, was quick to order the invasion fleets of all 20 legions into position. Of the other Primarchs present within the fleet, Khan, Lemonrus, and Malibron, there was no argument. Boom, there he is, in full name, authored by one of the official Black Library co-workers. Don't forget, here's the heartbreak. This was completely unofficial and in no way connected to Games Workshop, but let's talk about it real quick. Basically, one dude had turned up with his own chapter that didn't really fit in with the rest of the established legions, so he got to be one of the missing legions in this exact campaign. To summarize the events, the legions got their face kicked in and lost a huge number of marines to bring the system into compliance. Basically, their capital ship, containing thousands of marines and a large proportion of the legion, was destroyed. The Gedra Knights, which were the big bads in this campaign, had access to forbidden cloning tech, which allowed them to almost outclone the slaughter of their people. After compliance, Malibron virus-bombed the world that had been responsible for destroying his capital ship, then tried to steal the cloning tech for his own purposes to replenish his legion. But the Emperor and his brothers were unhappy with this, resulting in a massive war that ended with Malibron being captured and sent to Terra to be judged, while Korax had to get rid of the cloning tech. That, if you wish to make that jump, could be seen as that tech that they used later in the heresy to replenish his own legion. But this campaign may have just served as inspiration for that. I will put the blog link down below just so you guys can read it for yourself, it's really quite fun. So yeah, not official, but closest we are gonna get to it. Or are we? Let's take a closer look at some of the sources I mentioned earlier, because there are some details here that might give us a better look at what really happened. Part 1. There were problems with creating the Lost and Forgotten Legions. As established, the Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legion were created in the same manner as their brothers and likewise scattered across the galaxy by the horrific calamity that befell the Emperor's gene labs. A portal opened, whisking the infants inside their test tubes away into the Immaterium. But as seen in Horus Heresy Book 3 Exterminatus, what early history can be found on the Lost Legions mirrors that of their counterparts, with one notable exception. The Emperor would experiment and test each legion to roughly, in batches, where hundreds to a couple thousand Astartes were created and deployed during the Unification Wars. Yet 2 legions would never enter what was known as the Proto-Legion or Alpha stage of recruitment. One of the 2 legions who would not enter this stage until later into the Great Crusade is suspected to be none other than the Alpha Legion, yet how or why is unknown. Some suspect that by being the last legion to be created, there was no proper recruitment pool available. Others suspect that the Alpha Legion were kept in reserve at only 2,000 warriors, to be used to determine gene seed stability and mutation status as the other legions spread across the galaxy. Some whisper, however, that the other legion who never entered the Alpha stage of recruitment was one of the Lost Legions and remained in that state until reunited with their Primarch. It is theorized that this legion used a questionable pool of recruitment, tainted individuals who caused the downfall of their legion in one way or another, and that the fear of a similar fate befalling the Alpha Legion resulted in them being kept in reserve. So yeah, one of the Lost or Forgotten Legions had issues with its productive cycle of gene seed, resulting in only minor side missions being given to them, and them generally being held in reserve until their respective Primarch could be located. Part 2. The Loss of a Primarch, the Rangdan Xenocides. In 839 M30, the 105th Pioneer Company of the 5th Legion, who would later become the White Scars, discovered the Rangdan, a Xenos race of dark and macabre Rangdan herbivores and dark horrors. This alien species was so horrific that the entirety of the 1st Legion under Grandmaster Urian Vendrike deployed to enact a xenocide of unparalleled proportions. Although the 1st Legion found a swift victory in the breaking of an artificial war moon during the brutal battle of Advax Moors, the Rangdan commanded millions of enthralled laborers forced into unflinching obedience by neural collars. Millions of enthralled humans and rare Xenos breeds were crushed by the force of 50,000 Astartes alongside the forces of Fort Zana, who had only recently joined the Imperium. After 4 months, what was thought the heart of the Rangdan was extinguished, coming at the cost of some 5,000 fallen Astartes. The first Rangdan Xenocide would only be a prelude to what would come. The first victory was achieved in the Galactic North, yet in the coming years by the time of 860 M30, it will be discovered that the Rangdan held territory from the north all the way to the eastern fringes. During the second Rangdan Xenocide, whole expeditionary fleets went to their deaths without a single survivor, worlds were laid waste, dozens of Titan legios were obliterated, and by the end, even the indomitable might of the Legiones Astartes would be well matched. The Death Guard would face a terrible defeat had it not been for the intervention of Leman Russ and his Space Wolves. Yet while the Death Guard survived the onslaught, the same could not be said of others. Although accounts differ, entire Space Marine legions were said to have been lost during the second Xenocide. This leaves us with a possible note for what happened to one of the lost Primarchs and his legion. As, simply put, the other lost Primarch would be found after the Rangdan were scoured from the stars, so could not have been involved in any meaningful manner. The Imperium deployed more than 300,000 Astartes from 9 legions against the false Xenos. It is known that the Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Death Guard, White Scars, and the Legion, which would later become known as the Raven Guard, participated in this campaign. 4 legions therefore remain unaccounted for, leaving the possibility of the 2nd and 11th legions seeing deployment and maybe even their entire destruction. The Rangdan continued to defy the Imperium of Man for rulership of the stars, until the Emperor himself broke the labyrinth of night. The second Xenocide saw more than 80,000 legionaries give their lives, along with uncounted millions of human troops, for a 2-decade-long campaign of pure bloodshed against a foe who were the stuff of literal nightmares. The Space Wolves and Dark Angels would spearhead the second Xenocide and would oversee its aftermath. 5 years after the second Rangdan Xenocide ended, a third campaign would begin when Jagatai Khan brought news of surviving Rangdan to Leman Russ and Lionel Johnson. This last campaign was no war, but a brutal, one-sided extermination. The Dark Angels lost a staggering 50,000 warriors during this final campaign, and by the end of it, the reputation, glory, and honor of both the Dark Angels and Space Wolves were ruined. Together, the 2 legions held great purges to prevent any possibility of a fourth war with the Rangdan, and through this, the Space Wolves earned their nickname as the Emperor's Executioners, with both legions highly disliked and having lost the trust of the wider Imperium. Both of their notorieties will be overtaken by the likes of the Luna Wolves and Ultramarines in both size and glory. While the Dark Angels would engage in a third Xenocide, supposedly with the help of Alpharius and the Alpha Legion, where another 50,000 Dark Angels fell in battle, the Space Wolves undertook a great purge, so dark it tainted the visions of scryers all across the galaxy. Whole worlds, even those inhabited by humans, were turned to dust. When the Rangdan Xenocides were finally finished, both legions were changed. A legion had been lost, and the Imperium would never look the same as Xenos ever again. Part 3: The Forgotten and the Purged. Now there are 2 discrepancies in the virtual black books of random battles that have been redacted from all records. We know that these were fought by the Space Wolves near the end of the Great Crusade in 965 M30 and 969 M30, nice. But that's about it. However, they might be the key of what we are looking for on what happened to the second Primarch. With the titles of Forgotten and Purged specifically, it's pretty likely that one of them was corrupted during the second war with the Rangdan. The strange Xenos used their perverse technology to turn whole civilizations of humans, as well as other aliens, into enthralled servants and warriors. In addition to this, the Imperium had grown weary of contact with the Rangdan due to their unique ability to mask themselves in the void as Imperial vessels rather than the skeletal nightmares they truly were. In a way, they were invisible on the Imperial's radar, making it exceedingly hard to counter them in the void. It is speculation, but the likely outcome is that the second Primarch, who had been in the Crusade for nearly a century now, had been manipulated by the Xenos to betray the Emperor and his brothers. This would have been completely unplanned by the Emperor and Malkador, resulting in possibly a fully unproportional response. The Space Wolves became the Emperor's executioners right after the Xenocides ended, and it lines up pretty well when one of the legions was possibly purged from the books. But then we also have a forgotten Primarch. What happened with him? Well, we have two references to him, one being the infamous Subject 11 within the hallowed vaults deep underneath the Imperial Palace, and then a tiny reference in conversation between Malcador and Horus in the Lost Council. This is a direct quote about Subject 11 in the 9th edition Custodes Codex, page 10. The most learned of Imperial historiators cannot even imagine what treasures and horrors are kept within the Imperial's palace vaults, archives and gales. There are more chambers and cells than anybody could name, and much of what lies therein is so dreadful they could bring about the fall of humanity, or shatter the sanity of any unaugmented human that learns of them. The vaults not only hold artifacts and relics, however, they also hold beings. It that craves, Subject 11, and one of the fell are but a handful of thousands. At times, the Custodes even had to hold back the horrifying denizens of the rune-locked vaults from breaking free of their imprisonment. Part 4. The Lost Council, discussing the redacting. Let's look at the second source for the Forgotten Primarch. It is time for the masterpiece of the Heresy series, the Lost Council. Sigillite! Horus roared when he slammed the council chamber's doors open, striding ahead of his brothers, his footsteps like armored thunder. Explain yourself! The rage of several Primarchs was more than enough to send lords, adepts, and their bodyguards scrambling to hide or leave the chamber. Malcador remained calm and seated, however. Alpharius, this is your doing, I would guess. Alpharius only sneered as more mortals sought to escape the coming storm. I gave you an order, dear uncle. Explain yourself. The anger that radiated from Horus, Alpharius, and the Khan was enough to cause the arrival of the custodian guard seeking intruders, only to halt in confusion at the threshold of the chamber. You as well, Jagatai? What brings you so promptly to the throne world, when not even Lady Nyasta can reach your expedition's chantries, when we need to? My brother calls and I answer. It is the way you made us. No, Horus growled impatiently from behind gritted teeth. And now, you will answer me, Sigillite. I will not ask again. This confrontation had been inevitable. The Emperor had made it so, against Malcador's urging, and now the moment was upon them. I presume that you refer to the work being undertaken by the Masonic guilds in the Investiary. Horus was told by Alpharius what was happening. Orders to remove their brothers from history were given without the Aquila or Mark of the Throne upon them. Horus would not stand for the injustice and crime that was being committed, even if it were ordered by his father's most trusted confidant. Tell me then, convince me, by what right do you seek to remove one of the 20 great statues from the Investiary, if not to besmirch the glory of the legions? These are monuments to our great deeds, in the name of the Imperium, and the symbols to inspire all of mankind. At this, Malcador rose from his seat. Glory! Aye, something your allies only know because they see it reflected in my father's armor as you all fawn at his feet. The Sigillite chuckled, though the words stung more deeply than he would let anyone there present know. Do you fight to bring the galaxy to compliance, Horus? Because you seek glory and recognition? Or do you do it because it is your duty, the task given to you by your father, whom you love above all else? If the price of your loyalty is only a few hundred tons of white marble and a little fanfare, then what glory have the legions earned, truly? Horus would not stand the insult, especially while his brother was removed from history as they spoke. Horus at that moment was more willing to kill Malcador and those he thought were conspirators. But, dear uncle, the Primarch almost whispered as he loomed over the Sigillite, that is what we are. Ah, and there we have it, Malcador noted. The Catonian hubris, the gangland pride, hidden beneath a legion's noble livery. He smiled up at the Primarch. He was close enough to smell the machine oil and lapping powder of his warplate. Horus, Lord and Commander of the 16th Legion, Luna Wolves, the Sigillite said with a flourish. May I present the Honorable Na-Baron Petronius Vivar, of House Carpinus. He has come to see the glory of the Emperor's son for himself. Horus recognized Petronius' noble lineage and respected their great works of history even. I will not be distracted from my purposes here. This day, my brothers and I have come to put an end to this madness, once and for all. The history of the Imperium is not something that can be amended. We will not allow it. Alpharius nodded in agreement. We know the price of destiny, Lord Regent. We know the sacrifices that must be made. There was always a chance that some of us would not live to see the galaxy united beneath our father's banner. He saluted with one fist to his chest, being sure to mark the Sigilite's reaction to the outdated gesture. But to deny that they ever existed? To openly dishonor the memory of our fallen brother? What gives you the right to decide that, in secret, behind closed doors? Malcador glared at him. Do not speak to me of secrets. You are playing a dangerous game, the three of you, and my patience is starting to grow thin. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room upon him as he retrieved his eagle-top staff from his cradle beside his throne and steeled himself to face down the monster he had helped to create. He lowered himself back into the seat and peered out from beneath the cowl of his hood. While our great emperor is absent from the throne world, I carry his authority. And I act in his name. We here, we lords and ladies of Terra, have given the matter adequate deliberation and decided that a tribute to a fallen and disgraced Primarch is not a monument worthy of the investiary. The statue will be removed, the marble pulverized and used to line the paths of the state gardens in the inner palace. Not worthy. If you cannot see the reasoning behind this decision, then you only convince me further that it is the right one, and that there is nothing more to discuss. Pray, return to your legions. The Imperium needs more victories than ever. Let these failures lie. Quite unexpectedly, Horus laughed, loud and long. You can't even say it, can you? You can't even say his name. Do not speak it. Malcador thundered, loading the words with psychic force that struck the Primarch's mind like a hammer to the forehead. This is what your father commands, boy, and you all agree to it. To disobey now is to break the fate with the Emperor himself. The Primarch gave a wry, defiant grin. My brother's name what? Faster than human thought, Malcador's empty hand snapped up into an arcane gesture, long forgotten by any other living soul on Terra. Silence! Horus froze, his limbs locked fast within his armor. He shuddered uncontrollably, pressure building in his muscles as he fought against it. Slowly, Malcador stood, holding the Primarch in place with the power of his mind and nothing more. The Khan sprang towards the center of the room. Lord Regent! He urged, holding out his open hands. You must release him, please. He speaks from grief and the shame we all share. The air between them thrummed with invisible energy. Malcador could still see that hateful, defiant pride shining through in Horus's palsied gaze. You are not ready for the future you crave. None of you are. Malcador hissed when forcing Horus down to his knees. Mel! The stricken Primarch choked. Mel. The Sigilite's face twisted into a vengeful rictus. He felt the old, familiar rage beginning to stir deep in his undying soul. Enough! You will be silent, or I will unmake you, here and now! Horus's windpipe closed with a sickly crackle. His right eye bloomed red as blood vessels burst in the sclera. But still, he would not relent. Alpharius took an uncertain step back. Stop! Lord Regent, stop! You will kill him! Tiny crawling motes of light began to creep in at the edges of Malcador's vision. Sigilite! Bellowed the Khan, and in an instant it was over. Malcador released Horus. The Primarch crashed to the tiled floor, convulsing, almost gagging on rough lungfuls of air. Alpharius rushed to his side. Breathe, brother, just breathe. With his heartbeat pounding inside his skull, Malcador gripped the cold iron of his staff. He felt like a drowning man clinging to the last, slippery lifeline he could find. You will be the death of me, he gasped. You and all your princeling brothers. There are things in this galaxy that you do not know, simply because you do not need to. And that knowledge of that just eats away at your hearts, doesn't it? You cannot see what we have done for you, because you focus too much on what more you think you deserve. You have no earthly concept of what has been sacrificed, just so you may ascend. Horus's hands closed around the grip of his sword, sheathed at his hip. Its quillions were rendered as the wings of the Aquila, gleaming gold, with the all-seeing eye of the Terra between them. And this is why mankind cannot be ruled over by post-humans. Your concerns are not those of the ordinary man, who must eat and sleep and love and fear, and ultimately die, all without ever knowing the kind of immortality you so crave. If you cannot see this, then you are all the proof I need. The blade's energy field activated as it left the scabbard. The Khan shook his head. Peace, brother. Consider where you stand. But Horus's expression was dark. He glared down at the frail old man before him. Then he raised the sword high and drove it into the surface of the table. The tip speared right down through the petrified wood, sticking fast in the floor beneath it, and he left it quivering in place. Yeah, this was pretty on the nose. I personally believe Horus was trying to say Malcador's name again to get him to stop. but the Sigillite was too entrapped in his rage to want to listen, only to be calmed down by the other Primarchs in the room. Of course, it does line up hilariously well with the Mal part of Malibron. So you know what? Maybe that is a fun little reference to an ancient campaign that the Black Library's writers worked on in their free time. But what if I told you we have another insane mention of them in the short story The Chamber at the End of Memory, when Dorn gets a little too nosy while fortifying the Imperial Palace and finds the tombs of his two lost brothers. I knew them. Dorn took another step towards the doors, silently reaching for deep memories of the two brothers. Not all the Primarchs could say they breathed the same air as the lost sons, but Dorn was one of the few. He had been with them, if only for a while. Have you ever wondered why none speak of them? The Sigillite replied. Of course, there is the censure over all who know of the lost, never to talk openly of their existence. Still, in the absence of facts, all men will speculate, but you do not. The Primarchs never speak of their lost kinsmen in anything but the vaguest of terms. Have you ever wondered why that is? As you said, we are forbidden to do so, even when you are beyond your father's side. Even when no one would be aware of such a discussion, ask yourself why your thoughts always slip over to recall the lost and pass by. Malcador bowed his head. What were they called, Rogel? The Sigillite seemed almost sorrowful as he asked him. Your vanished brethren. Tell me their names and their titles. Dorn tried to grasp the vague recollection, tried to frame the questions that gnawed at him, but once more his perfect eidetic recall failed him. He could only see the phantoms of those moments. Holding onto them was like trying to capture smoke between his fingers. Their names were... His mighty voice faltered, his brows creased in frustration. They were... To his horror, Dorn realized that he did not know. The awareness was there. He could almost see the shape of the knowledge out on the far horizon of his thoughts, but it retreated from his every effort to see it clearly. Each time he attempted to frame a memory of the lost, it was like fighting a tidal wave. Everything else is clear, but they are ghosts in his mind. The Imperial Fist was experiencing an impossibility. Every known instant of his life was open to him, as if they were the pages of a great book, but not those moments. Something has been done to me. The beginnings of a new fury built in his chest, boiling at the realization of such an affront. You are behind this! Dorn whirled, drawing his chain blade in a glittering arc of lethal metal, bringing it to aim at Malcador's wizened, cloak-wreathed form. You shrouded my memories! You invaded my mind! For that I should cut you down! The Sigillite showed no reaction to the threat. Not just yours. Gilliman's and the others who met them. He let his words bed in. It is extremely difficult to extract a reminiscence, Malcador went on. Even in an ordinary human, in a brain as complex and perfectly engineered as that of a Primarch, the task becomes Herculean. Imagine a tree in the earth, rising from a web of roots. How would one remove that without disturbing a single atom of the soil? Memory cannot be cut and patched like a spool. It exists as a holographic thing, in multiple dimensions, but it can be adjusted. My father allowed that? Dorn's sword did not waver. He did not stop you. Stop me? The Primarch's eyes narrowed. Malcador slowly moved back, out of the ornate sword's killing arc. The loss of the 2nd and 11th were such a wound upon us, that it threatened the ideals at the heart of the Great Crusade. It would have ruined all that we had built in drive to reunite humanity, and drive off our enemies. Steps had to be taken. He met Dorn's hard gaze. The legionaries they left behind, leaderless and forsaken, were too great a resource to be discarded out of hand. They did not share the fate of their fathers. You and Robute argued in their favor, but you do not recall it. Malcador nodded to himself. It fell to me to see that they were attuned to new circumstances. You robbed them of their memories. I granted them a mercy, Malcador replied, his tone wounded. A second chance! What mercy is there in a lie? Dorn thundered. Ask yourself. The Sigillite aimed the burning head of his staff in the Primarch's direction. You wish to know the truth, Rogel. It is this. What I shrouded in you was done by your command. You told me to do it. You and Robute conceived of the scheme and granted me permission. Dorn's scowl deepened. I would never countenance such a thing. Untrue. Malcador slammed the base of his staff on the floor, the crash of the metal punctuating the world. Such was the fate of the lost that you willingly allowed it to make safe that knowledge. Another denial formed in Dorn's throat, but he held it there. He put aside his anger and looked upon the possibility with detachment, with the cold eye of the Praetorian. Would I have done such a thing, if a matter were grave enough? Would I have been so pragmatic, so bloodless in my command? Dorn distinctly knew the answer. There would be no doubt he would. If the Imperium was put at risk, he would give his life for it. The cost of some memories, of a fraction of his honor, was indeed a price he would pay. Malcador approached him, leaving his staff where it stood. One bony, long-fingered hand emerged from the voluminous sleeve of his monastic robes, and the sigillite reached up to hold it before Dorn's face. Faint sparks of eldritch light glistened there. "I will show you," said the Psyker. "For this instant, I will let you remember. You will know why the lost must remain a mystery." Dorn closed his eyes and a glacial fire erupted behind him. Deep within him, a shadow briefly dissipated, stealing the breath from his throat. A little later, Dorn thinks to himself. There was still much that the Psyker had said and done which the Imperial Fist did not accept, and although Malcador had professed to have been truthful with him, Dorn had doubts that would never ebb, but not in this matter. In this, he was certain. The lost were gone, and it was well that they were. The grand misfortunes that befell them crumbled in Dorn's mind, but they left behind certainty. What came to pass could overshadow everything. Dorn knew that now. The raw, hateful truth is clear to me. If they were with us now, this war, the Horus Heresy, would have already been lost. This also concludes all actual relevant sources to the 2nd and 11th Primarchs that can be properly connected and proven from multiple perspectives. But there is a real-world explanation of the lost and forgotten legions that people seem to have forgotten over time. Their original meaning lost on those that did not get to experience the earlier years of 3rd and 4th edition Warhammer 40k. So I'd like to bring it up again. It's just a thing that long-term hobbyists feel at times. The two lost Primarchs are a dated relic from 40k's early history. They make no sense in 40k's modern lore, and any reference to them is generally used as a red herring to hype up a specific new novel or campaign book. 2 and 11, the Forgotten and the Purged, the two lost Primarchs and their two lost legions. They are one of the oldest parts of 40k lore, to the point that you can find references to them in Space Crusade, also known as StarQuest in some countries, before Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader turned into the 2nd edition of Warhammer. Their original supposed purpose in 1st and 2nd was to make room in the official lore for fan-made chapters. Anyone who painted their own army of Space Marines could claim them as the 2nd or the 11th, and in 1993 that made perfect sense. 40k was much smaller back then, less defined and less thought out, and the Lost Primarchs had an important role in helping people integrate their headcanon into the setting. But this is a myth. Games Workshop just wrote them in because we don't know. In a way, it's an historical connection to the two lost Roman legions, but that is actually about it. GW rather wants people to make their own chapters, even showing them how to do it in their older rulebooks, codexes and white dwarfs. People were not generally meant to recreate legions. But now, many years later, we are several different eras of 40k removed from 2nd edition. I mean, think just about how much the Horus Heresy novel series has changed the franchise. And realize the first book in it was published 13 years after 1993. It's a totally different ballgame now. And throughout all that time, GW chose to emphasize and intensify the mystery of these two missing Primarchs. The 2nd and 11th were not just purged, they were erased. Details and names mind-scrubbed from their brains of everyone except the Sigillite and the Emperor himself. Not even the traitor Primarchs, not even after they became demon princes, can think of their missing brothers in anything but the briefest and shallowest terms. There is no precedent for that kind of total psychic suppression, which must surely also spread to a significant portion of the Imperium, because we don't have any indication of how it was done or maintained. Millions of people must have seen these Space Marines. We are just supposed to accept it. In the chamber at the end of memory, like we covered before, Rogel Dorn finds the tombs of the two Primarchs, and Malcador temporarily restores his memories. Dorn relearns the need for erasure, and says that whatever threat his two brothers posed, it would have dwarfed the entire heresy, and already seen the Imperium put to ruin. Yeah. There are two big problems with this, and the first is GW's edict, because Games Workshop will never let this mystery be solved or even explained. Any reference to the Lost Primarch can only ever be a dead end. Aaron Dembski-Bowden lays it out very clearly. Did the Ultramarines get so big because they took in Marine from the missing legions? No, because if they did, that would be an answer, and there cannot be answers. Was Leman Russ so confident against Magnus because he had already purged one of his brothers? No, because if he did, that would also be an answer, and GW just won't let that happen. Of course, for our own uses nowadays, we can do whatever we like with them. You wanna make a cool homebrew legion? Go ahead. But understand, the GW store manager might frown at you in a moment of confusion when you explain your headcanon to them. For now, this will conclude our deep dive into what may possibly be the Imperium's greatest secret. The lost and forgotten Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legions still impact the Imperium long after the removal from their records, and maybe their fates were sealed from the beginning. Their true fate shall forever be kept by the Emperor and a few Primarchs who chose to not let their memories be altered. Were these sons of the Emperor heroes and exemplars of humanity, or did they embody every flaw and fault of humanity or the Emperor's own flawed genius? But what is your opinion on all of this? What do you think Dorn re-experienced when his memory was wiped again? What do you think happened to both legions? Do you believe Malibron should be considered canon, or is he a bit too much out there for you? Let me know your ideas, suggestions, comments, concerns, ideas and theories down in the comment section below. If you liked the video, give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.